through, Grace. It's good. She's little, she can go that way. We couldn't do that. Let's just open in a word of prayer. Brother Dennis, would you pray for us, please?
Heavenly Father, today we thank you and bless you, thank you for love and grace. Thank you for the hope that you give us, the grace, the peace, Lord Jesus Christ. I will just thank you. I suppose most of the words that you so encourage us to listen and take in and put words into action. And thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Amen. Okay, so I'm going to answer one of the questions that came in the box. It was next week. I was going to do something for a few weeks. I've got 3 weeks of Sunday school, but we've got this group coming in, so we've gave them the 2 weeks. So I thought I would answer one of the questions. It came from Fran. Fran doesn't mind me calling her out for this, because she's a school teacher, and I'm sure Beth has to go through this as well. So here's her question. If Adam and Eve were the first humans, were they from the Stone Age? Okay. Yeah. If they aren't, and she put in brackets here, which I think from what you've taught they're not, how do they align? How do they coexist? Okay, I thought that was a really interesting question. Got really excited about that question. That was the one that I wanted to answer straight away, but I wanted to make sure I got enough time. Okay, so let's talk about the Stone Age first of all. What do you think? That should be think. I stayed up to watch the football match last night. I'm just letting you know. That's what do you think of when you hear the words the Stone Age? Ethan? Caveman. Yeah, that's a good thing. Anyone else? Neanderthals. Yeah. Anybody else? Millions and millions of years ago. Yes. Yeah, so there was just stone tools, stone weapons, yeah. Now, let me, was you going to say something? Flintstones, yeah. Yeah, that's right. Let me ask you, why is this an important question to answer?
Because the world notion of the world's millions of years old.
Yeah. Yeah. This grits. Yes, yeah, I think so, yeah. Yeah. Here's the definition I found online. The Stone Age was a broad prehistoric, see the term prehistoric? We'll talk about that in a moment. Period during which stone was widely used to make stone tools with an edge appointing to a percussion surface. The period lasted roughly 3.4 million years and ended between 400 BC and 200 BC with the advent of metalworking. Because of its enormous time scale, it encompasses 99% of human history. Okay, that flies in the face of everything that the Bible teaches, doesn't it? Okay, so it's telling us that there's a timeline in human history. So it says there BC, so that's talking before Christ. What do they call it in the textbooks? They don't call it before Christ, do they? What do they call it? B. So this side, that's it, the Common Era, BCE and CE, the Common Era. They just try to get around the fact of using the term Christ. So we would say BC, before the cross. AD is after the cross. What does AD stand for? And what does it mean? It means in the year of the Lord. Okay, in the year of the Lord. Okay. So they're saying here that the timeline, if we go all the way back to, what is it, 3.4 million? 3.4 mil, we'll put that, is where we start to see humans, or at least ape-type creatures, ape men, well, they don't like using some of these terms nowadays, evolving from other apes. Okay, and as they're evolving, one of the evidence is that they can start making tools, basic tools. Okay, so they call this prehistoric. So before we actually get to humans, like see there, 400 and 200 BC. So let's just say that's about here, 4,000 sorry, to 2000 BC. we would call this the Stone Age. Okay, so from this period of time here all the way back to that 3.4 million point, that is what's called the Stone Age. I should write it there. Really. This is the Stone Age era, where we hadn't evolved enough to start using anything metal. We hadn't built civilizations or gone into farming or anything like that. It was just, we were just simple creatures. So the evolution of anthropology, what's anthropology? The study of man, okay? The study of man is usually laid out in a three-age system that is based on the development of how man used tools. So this is under the science of archaeology. Okay, some scientists would deny that archaeology is a science, but it is a science. And so they're going off to sites, they're digging things up. Depending on what sort of tools they find, they'll put it in one of these eras. So I think I've put it up here, the Stone Age, which we says 3.5 million years all the way up to there. Then we have the next one, which is the Bronze Age. Now, anyone ever worked with bronze, copper? Yeah, Sean has, myself. What's the difference between bronze and iron? Iron's stronger. Yeah, you play Minecraft. Yeah. Yeah. So we call this period of time the Bronze Age. It's a lot more softer in material. If you had a bronze hammer or copper hammer, we actually have them at work, and you start it in steel, it'll just leave dents in the copper. Okay. And then after that, the next period of time, notice that goes up to 1100 BC. That's about the time of King David, by the way. King David's era, 1100 BC. And then after that, we have the Iron Age, which is up to the present. Iron Age. And that goes all the way up. Okay. So I've got some pictures here. Stone tools. They would take bones and sinew, the tendons of animals. They would chip away at flint. Sometimes they sharpened actual boulders. So I was watching a video the other day of a man, he got a boulder, he wanted to try and sharpen it, make a stone axe. And he was there for days just sharpening a stone against another stone. You know, and then he got some sinew, which is like the tendons and the ligaments of animals, and then stuck it in some wood and then tied it up. And then he tried to cut down a tree, and it took him hours and hours to cut down. This little tree was about this big. And so the Stone Age tools, and then the Bronze Age, they start, obviously they have weapons. Do we see that in the Bible, the way? People using bronze. Yeah, we see that in the Bible. Bronze weapons. What's the problem with bronze weapons? They don't stay sharp for very long. As soon as you one bronze sword, it's another bronze sword, it'll just dent. It just dents. And then obviously the Iron Age got a lot more sophisticated. It's a lot more harder. So there's this idea that man got more and more intelligent. He managed to mine out copper, smelt. So he learns now to smelt things, melting it, and then forming it. I used to work in a foundry, and so let's say, for example, you wanted to make a copy of that in copper. What you would have to do, you would get a box with no top and bottom, just edges. You put it down, you put very fine sand inside, you stamp it down as hard as you can, and then you press that in, so it's halfway across. And then you would put another box on top of it, exactly the same, and you would put the sand on top of that, and you would stamp that down as well, and then you'd lift up the top box, and you would have two half imprints. You take the mould out, and then you put air holes and feeding holes, and then you put it in, and then you pour the metal, and as the metal goes into the hole and fills up, the air comes out. You're going to make sure you get it the right way around. I can remember once I worked in a foundry, and we had a lamppost come on the back of a wagon that had been set up to pour some metal in, aluminium. So you imagine we had these big ladles of aluminium melted, standing outside. It was only up the road here, Ford House Road, standing on the back of wagons, and we said to the lorry driver, which is the feeding hole and which is the air hole? And he says, I'm just the lorry driver, I don't know. And they put it in the air hole, and the thing just blew up. And there was cars splattered with aluminium, and you know, yeah, very dangerous. And when it hits the floor, anyone ever spat on an iron? What happened? It just rolls. It just chases you across the... Very dangerous. Okay, smelting. So, this is a promotion of a worldview. Remember, this isn't what the Bible teaches. The Bible doesn't teach that there was these different eras, these three different ages. And we're going to see as well, I don't think that archaeology teaches it either. We're going to look at the biblical view in a moment. So this promotes the idea that man slowly evolved over time from cave-like dwellings with simple tools all the way up to advanced technologies today. Do we still have people living in caves today? Yeah. When I was doing some of the research for this, I found there was this tribe or this community that had kicked some people out of their community, and they had to go and live in the wilds, and they ended up going and living in caves. And this was only about 300 years ago, and they've got a little tribal community now, and they live in caves. But they came from a society that originally wasn't living in caves. Because it is popularised, funded, accepted in the media, and taught in our education system, no other view is really taken taken serious. If you talk about the biblical view, how long, listen to this, how long has man been on the earth according to the biblical view? Yeah, 6,000 years. And what do people, if you tell that your friend, your secular friend, your unbelieving friend, what will they do? They will think it's ridiculous. They'll think it's an absolute joke, because it's obvious that we've been on the earth for millions and millions of years, and life on this earth has been on for even hundreds of millions of years. But why is it that they hold it so dear? Why do they believe it so much? Yeah. They, from as soon as you go to school, they'll give you books on dinosaurs, and they start educating you straight away, and people just accept this as the norm, and anything else is laughed at. It has a lot of, if you accept those views, some Christians still accept those views, they do believe in evolution, we call them theistic evolutionists. But it also has a moral problem with it, doesn't it? What's the moral problem? If we believe that, what are human beings? We're just animals. We're just evolved animals. We're not made in the image of God and the likeness of God. And we know from nature that we are completely distinct from the animal kingdom. Also, because it's promoted by paleontology. What's that? Paleontology? Study of fossils, specifically fossils, but some dinosaurs. Evolutionary biology, the idea that we evolved, and most of the fields of science that crosses over into historical anthropology, it passes as science-based. So, do you ever get this? Oh, I believe in science. Yeah, I believe in science, and I don't believe in religion. And it is this idea: is if you believe in God, you don't have any facts. There's no evidence of what you believe. You believe in faith, and we believe in science. And it's kind of passed off like that. And we're going to see at the end of this, that's just not true. There's lots of Christians, lots of believers that are scientists, the best in the world in the field. Most modern scientific, what do they call them? Like chemistry, biology, there's a name from. Guilds of study were all started by Christians. When you go back in history, some of the greatest scientists in history hold faith and believe in some of the sciences that they practice. But what we're going to see that a lot of this isn't science. Okay, so it really isn't science. So biblical anthropology, what we're going to see now is, what does the Bible say about humans, the anthropology of humans? Man was created with great intelligence. Let's just look at Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2, verse 19. And it says this, it says, "And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, That was the name thereof. And Adam gave names to all the cattle, to the fowl of the air, to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helpmeet for him. Now, what is that explaining there? Yeah, which... Yeah. So when the Bible divides the animal kingdom, it usually refers to kinds. And it's to do with mating kinds, like dogs. So every dog pretty much can mate with another dog. So you can get a Great Dane, and it would be a bit of an awkward thing, but a Chihuahua. And you can end up with a puppy. It would be a weird-looking puppy, I presume, but that's a kind. Certain species, we can't get caught up with the term species. The Bible uses the term kind. It says they multiplied after their own kind. And it's estimated that there was about 2,500 different kinds of, different kinds, should I say. So you can imagine Adam had to name them all. They would come along and he would say, yeah, that's a dog, and that's a cat, and that's a giraffe, and that's so on and so on. So, but remember this, no one's ever named an animal. No one's ever, so you're making up names. Can you make up 2,500 names up in a day? It's just one animal after another animal, and it's going, that's a giraffe, and that's this, and that's that. So it's telling us that there's an intelligence there, which is the opposite of what we're learning from evolution, which is the idea that we became intelligent over time. Also, we're made in the image of God, and the image of God is that we have authority, that we have emotions, that we have an intellect, we have a will. Now, animals don't have those things. Animals are created with instincts. There's some funny videos, I don't know if you've seen them online, where the owners of dogs have set up a camera and they feed the dog. But then they make out that people, like they get some of the friends to come in with balaclavas to raid the house and to pull it. And the dog turns round to protect him, but then just runs back and carries on eating the food. It doesn't, when people say, oh, it'll do anything for me, they won't. They're instinctual creatures. They will only ever do what they instinctually do. It will always be that way. It doesn't matter how much you think they love you. If they're hungry and it's you or food, they're choosing the food over you. Okay? So, we were created with intelligence. Man was instantly working in husbandry and agriculture and farming. Look at Genesis chapter 4. Verse 2. And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of the sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. Now, who taught Abel to be a shepherd? No one. He just knew. Well, he knew. And who in the Garden of Eden, it says that Adam was left to tend the garden. So he was a gardener. So how did he know? How did he know about all the different plants and how all the plants worked? When to water them, or when to trim the stems, and how would he know all those things? It's telling us that God gave him already information. There's this great belief amongst creation scientists that we're getting dumber. We're actually losing knowledge as we get older and older. Okay, so we see there shepherds. Also, and Cain was a tiller of the ground, so farming. Now, again, evolution teaches the opposite way, doesn't it? It says that we eventually, after learning hunting and so on, thought, what about if we just settle down and use this plot of land and start growing things? We don't have to keep wandering off all the time. We don't have to be nomads. And even today, there's people that are still nomads that will travel around from place to place. So we see there architecture and urbanites within one generation. What's an urbanite? Cities, yeah. Genesis 4, look at verse 17. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch, and he builded a city. Straight away, so he knows how to build. He's building houses, but not just a house. It says there he built a city. So in other words, that him and his family started building a city. She conceived, bare Enoch, builded a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Also, what do we see? We see the nomadic lifestyle and back to farming. Look at verse 20. And Ada bare Jabal, and he was the father of such as dwell in tents and of such that have cattle. So there were some people that city started filling up perhaps, and he just decided we're going to go back to living in tents. But they still went about and did farming. Musical instruments, look at verse 21. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father. What this is saying really is, this is the first person ever, right, of all such as handle the harp and the organ. Now, what's the harp? What does he mean by that? Stringed instruments. And what's the organ? Wind instruments. So now we have the development of, within just one generation or a few generations, we have musical instruments. So they're designing and creating musical instruments. The smelting of metals, of all the metals. Notice this, we're not talking about Stone Age or Bronze Age or iron, all the metals. It says in Genesis 4:22, and Zillah, she also bare Tubal Cain, an instructor in every artificer in brass and iron. So they jumped the Stone Age and went straight to brass and iron. So what we're saying is that we're seeing it all together. You'll see stone, you'll see bronze, and you'll see the Iron Age all together. And this is 4,000 years before Christ. Because remember, that's when Adam and Eve were created. This is really interesting. Look at Job chapter 28. Job chapter... Now, if you don't know, the book of Job is actually the oldest book in the Bible. We think Genesis historically is the oldest book. But it was written by Moses, so it came after Job. Job was written during the patriarchal period, or plays out in the patriarchal period. Job chapter 30. Oh, sorry, 28, yes, yeah, 28. Sorry about that. Right. And verse 1. But now that... I'm in chapter 30. Because we've got to go and look at chapter 30 in a bit. Surely there is a vein for the silver and a place for the gold where they find it. So he's talking here about finding precious stones. Iron is taken out of the earth, and brass is molten out of the stone. He setteth an end to darkness, and searcheth all the perfection, the stones of darkness, and the shadow of death. The flood breaketh out from the inhabitants, even the waters forgotten of the foot. They are dried up, they are gone away for men. As for the earth, out of it cometh bread, and under it turned up, as it were, fire. I'm just going to read, I rarely do this in another translation, okay, so don't throw me out the church, okay? I'm going to read you another translation. Sure, because it's a little bit difficult to understand what's being said. It says, surely there is mine for silver and a place where gold is refined. Then he says, iron is taken from the earth and copper is smelted from ore. Man puts an end to the darkness, and he probes the farthest recesses for ore in the deepest darkness. And what it's saying is that they're going into the mines. They're not just casually coming across, they're already mining. It's saying that already at the time of Job, which is the patriarchal era, people are professional miners. It gets even more detailed from that. It says, verse 4, far from human habitation he cuts a shaft. In places forgotten by the foot of man, far from men he dangles and sways. They go down right in the crevices of the earth. Dangling and swaying means that they're on a swing, being lowered down, like swinging around, dangling and swaying, looking for iron ore. Okay. It says, food may come from the earth, but from below it is transformed is by fire. Because remember, what brought about all the precious stones, gold, silver, precious stones? It's fire, isn't it? So he's talking about fire. Its rocks are the source of sapphires, containing fields of gold. No birds of prey knows that path. No one goes down there but humans, yeah. No falcon's eye has seen it. Proud beasts have never trodden it. No lion has ever prowled over it. But this is the one. Look at verse 9. The miner strikes the flint. Now, what does he mean by that? What's he mean by striking a flint? Setting something on fire. Right, look what he says. He overturns the mountains at their base. What's that describing? Explosives. When you're overturning something, it means you're blowing it out, you're getting it out. You go into the garden, you overturn the turf, you're lifting it up and you're turning it over. Okay, but if you're overturning things with a flint, what are you doing? You're blowing things up. So at the earliest stages of mankind, people were mining, sophisticated mining, where they were actually already designed, you know, explosives. So they were blowing things up. Okay, so this is really old. So man is stripped of all this in one moment, and this would lead to homelessness. Think about this. So you've got all of this, all this technology, all these cities, everything, and then all of a sudden in one moment, if that's stripped away from you, what do you do? Did that ever happen in the Bible? I should ask that. Was it ever stripped away from it? So we're looking at Genesis 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it's telling us that all these things were developing. There were cities, people were all over the earth learning all these things. Was there ever a time when it was all stripped away? When? The flood. And they had to relearn it all over again, didn't they? Was it ever stripped away again? What's after the flood? The major world event after the flood. Genesis chapter 11, Tower of Babel. And what happened in the Tower of Babel? Okay. Look at chapter 11 of Genesis. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 11. People forget this. And this is really important. Verse 1, and the whole earth was one language, one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, they found it the plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Now, what did God say that they were to do? Spread out, distribute, but what did they actually do? They said, no, we'll just stay here, okay? God had already told them how to worship, where to worship. Remember Cain and Abel? There was a proper way to approach God. And they said, no, what we're going to do, we're going to build a city, a government, and a one-world religious system. Do you know Babel? Do you know the word Babylon is Babel? I don't know if you knew that. In Hebrew, Babylon is Babel. So in the book of Revelation, when it talks about the great Babylon, it's a resurrection of this religious system. There's going to be a one-world government connected with a one-world religious system. And everyone will worship in this one-world religious system. And this is a picture, well, it's a picture, it's an historical fact of what was happening there. So verse 4, and they said, go, let us build up a city and a tower whose top may reach into heaven, and let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the earth. It's a reverse of what God had said to do. Okay? And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have one language, and this they began to do, and nothing will be restrained with them, from them, which they have imagined to do. Now listen, this is what happens when the world comes together. Technology will advance faster, especially when they're speaking the same language. Obviously, what we're seeing now with the technology, all language barriers are being broken down. We have the technology now to speak in all languages through Google Language and, you know, whatever, all these different things. And that's what we're heading towards. We're going to be heading towards a one-world religious system and a one-world government. Then he says, go, verse 7, go, let us go down. Talking God in the plural there, and confound their language that they may not understand one another's speech. In other words, how do we slow this down? Put a language barrier in there. And so no, we can't communicate and pass this information on anymore. And so it slows down the advancement of technology. Then verse 8, so the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore the name of it was called Babel, because the Lord did confound the language of all the earth. And so what we see is that God distributes mankind all over the earth. Now, we haven't got a map of the world, but you imagine if you got lifted up from your job one day and you woke up and you're in Cannock. No, I'm just kidding. You're in a forest somewhere, and there's 10 of us, and one of them's a carpenter, one of them's a plasterer, one of them's a tailor, you know. What are we going to do? It's raining. What we're going to do? We're going to get, oh, there's a cave there. Let's go to this cave. It's a quick shelter. You know, you would be lost, wouldn't you? And you literally have to rebuild this. And you've lost so much knowledge, because there's a lot of people that used to be with us, say the ones that used to make musical instruments, they're not with us anymore. And the ones that used to make all the tools, they're not with us anymore. So we've got to start learning how to make tools again. I remember my granddad, he used to get the stone and he would do this, and there would be real bad attempts at making tools, and that's basically what happens. Just the world got stripped back in its knowledge. And so you're going to see all over the world different communities of people, and that's where we get races from. You know, I mean, you imagine if you've got 10 people over here, they're all going to start marrying each other, and they're all going to look like each other, aren't they? And it's amazing when you look at a world map, and you look at what people look like. Have you ever seen it? Have you ever followed it? Like you go across Russia, and obviously to start with, as we start entering Russia from the start, they look like us. They look like Sean, don't they? All right. And they get further across Poland, start looking like Stace, and then then we get into Russia, and then as you get out further, people start their eyes change, don't they? We have, like, you ever heard of the Mongolians? Yeah, the Mongolians. And if you start going down, then you start getting into the Asian countries like China, Japan, Korea. But if you don't, if you carry on going to northeast Russia, and you get on a little boat and you pop over, where do you get to? Alaska. And have you ever seen Alaskans? What do they look like? Pastor Grits. You start going down, and then you've got more people looking like Pastor Grits. And as you start going further and further down, people look like Pastor Grits. They start getting smaller. Yeah? And then they start looking like who in the church? Army. Yeah? You've got Guatemalan, yeah? And that's basically, when you look at the world, you can see the way that it's integrated. It's grown like that, because that's the way that God has distributed the human race. There's another passage there in Job. We won't go there because we haven't got time. But in the book of Job, it talks about a people that are just lost. They just find themselves in this place, and they start living in holes and fashioning tools. And now you imagine, thousands of years later, you come along and you go into a cave, and you go, what's it? Oh, there's stone tools here. Oh, they must not have been very clever. No. And they could have been really clever. You know, they could have been the musicians all dumped there, and they were really intelligent musicians. But when it came to making tools, they were terrible at making tools. You know, you just don't know. And so what I'm trying to say is, you're looking at evidence, and you've got to interpret that data. So the Stone Age, really, is there really a Stone Age? The term, the Stone Age, and the Three-Age system came from a Dutch coin collector called Christian Jurgen Thomson, and he was he was the first head of the Danish Museum, and was requested to bring some order to all these jumbled artifacts. So they've got all these artifacts of iron tools and bronze tools and stone tools, and they said, we need to do something about this. Can we get some order? Can you tell us when these were made? But really, all he was a coin collector. He was a specialist in coins, and he was the one that if we excuse the pun, coined the terms. He made these terms up. So where did he get these terms from? His imagination. He just made them up. And you'll find a lot, when you look into evolution and you start looking into the history of evolution and why it is we believe some of the things, a lot of it's just made up in the imagination of men. And we'll see some examples in a moment. His successor, J.J.A. Worsay, researched this idea through archaeological digs being performed around Europe, especially in Ireland. And so he was going there and seeing, well, if we find stone ones here, then these must be the older ones. And we find bronze ones here, you know, you see how it works. And what he was finding, they were finding all of them in all the sites at the same time, showing that they used all the tools. It wasn't, this nice sort of clear diagram, if you like, that they had made up. You won't find that in the textbooks, though. So we found that stone, bronze and iron tools were found together, showing that the three-age system's not valid. But because it's taught, you know, you imagine there's people that got PhDs in this stuff, and they've gone and they've got the PhDs, and all of a sudden if it comes out it's false, or it's not real, you know. There's people that have studied, got PhDs on missing links, and later on years they found out to be forgeries. And people, you know, believe it still. So the system was invented not on the data, but for the convenience and to give credence to the evolutionary model, the evolutionary worldview. So it was done out of convenience. It wasn't done based on the truth. When they were going around and doing archaeological digs, they weren't finding this. They were finding all of these three things. And it fits the Bible, doesn't it, really? the evolution then of all things, and we see with everything, the Big Bang, the idea that everything comes from nothing. These are all miracles, by the way. Evolution's a miracle. The idea that everything comes from nothing, the Big Bang. The astronomical evolution, that everything organises itself in space, just in the right place, so that everything works. That's a miracle. The formation of the earth, they call it the Goldilocks effect. You ever heard of that? The story of Goldilocks. He goes and tries the porridge, and the porridge was too hot, and then tries some more porridge, and it was too cold, and then the middle porridge, it was just right. And they call where the earth is, it's called the Goldilocks effect, because the earth, the size of the earth, the spin and rotation of the earth, the angle of the earth, the way that the earth moves and travels around the sun, everything is perfect. It's the Goldilocks, they call it the Goldilocks effect. When they're looking out and trying to find other planets out there for life, and they don't realise, well, they do realise how difficult it is. It's impossible, because it's a miracle in itself to have this. The geological evolution, the idea that all of the water, how much water's on the earth, how much of the land mass is, I think it's something like 70%. Where did it come from? Do you know what they teach us? That it came on meteors. So it just, somehow, water was carried on meteors, and it was plummeting and beating the earth, and then eventually it fills 70% of the earth. You know, the Bible gives us the answer where it comes from. It comes from God. I know it sounds like a simple answer. And the Bible tells us that when God created the earth was completely covered with water, and the waters receded. And it says, remember, it receded. Where did it recede? Does anyone know your Genesis here? Into one place. How can the water recede into one place? What does that mean? I mean, you imagine an earth, and if it all goes into one place, what's around it? Land. So it's either that's the land, or that's the land, or that's the sea. And what do they teach us? Anyone ever heard of continental drift? Yeah? And what's continental drift? Pangaea, they call it the island of Pangaea. Or once upon a time, the entire world, all the continents were joined together. And that's what the Bible says, that all the islands were joined together. And what caused them to drift? The flood. Yeah, during the flood. Remember, the flood lasted for how long? Roughly. Nearly a year. It wasn't just 40 days and 40 nights. That was just how long it rained until the rain covered the entire earth. That would have caused catastrophes, all of it, earthquakes, volcanoes going off, all sorts of things. They call it catastrophic plate tectonics. Rapidly. So this idea is that because it moves at 1 millimetre or 2 millimetres a year, still now we're moving, that means they go, well, we work that back, that takes millions of years. But what about if there was a catastrophe that went whoosh and just ripped it apart rapidly? And that's it. You're interpreting old data in everything. All these evolutionists, they're looking back and saying, well, we can see a star in the distance, therefore it's been there for billions of years because the light takes so long to come here and things like that. What they're doing is they're looking at historical data, and they've got to interpret that data based upon the information that they have at this time. So geological evolution, that has to happen as well. Chemical evolution, so now you have chemicals. How do you get life from non-life? Do you know the resurrection of the dead? What do we call that? Begins with an M. It's a miracle. Yeah? But how do you get life from non-life? It's a miracle. That's basically what you're saying. You can't resurrect a person from the dead, even though all the bits are there of the person, you know. But what about if, you know, we reduce it right down to the simplest thing of one cell? And so somehow you've got to get all the amino acids to order themselves, thousands of them in perfect order, to produce proteins. And then the proteins, after arrange themselves in perfect order, come together, make a cell, and come to life. That's a miracle. Those are miracles. Because if you get it wrong, it doesn't work. And then what happens, you've got a cell now that's come to life. How's it going to eat? What's its power source? How's it going to reproduce? So it's got to have all of those things. You know, it's just one miracle after another miracle after another miracle. So then you've got biological evolution, this idea that, you know, we're changing from species to species to species. And we just don't see it. We've never seen it. We've never observed this in the history of science. None at all. In fact, you can interbreed all the dogs you like, and what are you always going to get? You're going to get a dog. Can you crossbreed a dog with a cat? No. No. You can't, can you? And you're always going to get, it's a bit like if you make a cake, let's say you bake a cake, and you put, instead of sugar, in some salt, and you bring it to church and say, oh, I've made this cake, and it looks really nice, and then someone bites into it, and what they're going to do? They're going to spit it out and say it's salty. The cake will only ever taste what the ingredients are like. And it's the same with life. Whatever you put in is what you're going to get out. You're not going to get something new, and you never will get anything new. Human evolution, obviously, eventually we become intelligent according to human evolution. And here's the problem again, all the missing links. I was watching a video this week about missing links. One of the things they say, when they find a skull, they'll look at what they call the cranial capacity of the skull. Do you know what that means, the cranial capacity? It means how big it is, or how small it is, the brain. And the theory is, for years the theory was, if it's a small brain, then it's done. If it's a big brain, it's intelligent, and it's completely false. Because they've like some people give their bodies to science. And he was given an example of this man with a really high IQ, and he had a really tiny CC, a brain capacity. Small, and then there's other people with big heads, and they're not that clever, are they? You know. and then they talk about brow lines. Like someone has got a big brow line, that must mean he's further back down the process. But that's just not true. You know, there's some really clever people with big brow lines. You're just going on shapes. You don't know the intelligence of the skeleton. And just because you find something, you can't say, well, that's a missing link. You just don't know. And again, it's the way you interpret the data. You dig something up and you say, well, here's my presupposition. I'm going to make that fit the presupposition, and you can't. And all this takes time. And notice they have to rely heavily on dating systems. It has to be millions of years because they know it's impossible. But if we can send it millions and millions and millions of years, and then perhaps it just might be, they have to marry together. And that's why it's important. I mean, remember, we only believe in a 6,000-year-old year period of life on the earth, all life. That's all life. We get that, by the way, by following the dates of when people were born and died. The Bible makes it very clear. So-and-so lived for so long, he had so many children, then he died. And then you just start matching it all up, and you can see that we've only been here for 6,000 years. And there's been studies that are done in population growths, how fast populations can grow. And people think, well, there's nearly 8 billion people on the earth now. In the Second World War, there was only 2. So in less than 100 years, 6 billion people have, and keep in mind the Second World War was the worst point in history of murdering people. In the last 100 years, we've murdered more people than I think all history put together. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of people have died, and yet population is still growing. And people have done the research. If you take the stats of basic population growth and reverse it back from generation to generation, it comes to about 4,000 years. Now keep in mind, in the theory of evolution, they try to say that we've been on the earth as humans for at least 3,000 years. The models don't fit at all, the population models. I can remember just doing the sum. Go onto Wikipedia, look at today's growth model, and just remember a generation is 80 years, let's say. A person lives to 80 years. And just take 8 billion and reduce it backwards and backwards and backwards and see how many, you'll be surprised how many generations. Not many. And you'll always come to something like 4,000 to 4,500 years. Now I said 6,000, didn't I? What happened 4,500 years ago? The flood. Who came off the flood? How many people came off the flood? 6. 8. It was 8. Yeah, 8. But how many people had children after the flood that we know of? Only 6. And there's no more mention of Noah and his wife having any more children. Because remember, we all descend from those 3 men and women. And so the population grew again. And what you're doing, by the way, when you're doing that, you're losing information. You know, I think I've showed you this before. You've got a mum and dad, okay? We'll pick on Sean and Stace again. Right. Sean's got 46 chromosomes, okay? I think so, anyway. Ethan, there's Ethan, he's got 46 chromosomes, right? He got 23 from his dad, 23 from his mom, okay, to get that. But that means there's 23 left, isn't there? That no one's ever used, 50%. What happens if they die? What happens to that information? We lose it. Even if they have 10 children, they will never use up all that information. That's why your kids look alike. You know, it might be that you're 40% of previous, and then some other, but you'll never use all of the chromosomes. And so what we're doing is we're actually losing genes or genetic information. So we're getting worse. We're getting less intelligent. There's a guy called John Stanford. He's a Christian. He wasn't a Christian, he was an atheist, but he was a geneticist, world-leading geneticist in America. He invented something called the gene gun. Do you know genetically modified plants? He invented the gun that does that. It shoots genes into the gun and jumbles around the DNA of the plants. Real clever guy. And he started studying genetics, obviously, and he began to realise that there's a problem. That first of all, he realised that it's information. It's a computer program. And from that alone, he became a believer. He became a Christian. But he still believed in millions and millions of years. And so, as he was studying more and more, he began to realise that we're getting worse. Like his book, by the way, is called Genetic Entropy. We're losing information. And with every generation, on average, we have 100 mutations. So, you know, every time someone's born, you're passing on 100 mutations. So in the earth today, in the next generation, there's going to be 8 billion mutations, bad mutations. We're losing information. And just by working that out, he became a young earth creationist. Because he realised, just by looking at the science is telling you that we haven't been around for that long. Because if we were, we would be, yeah. You can watch him on YouTube. If you don't read a book, John Stanford, his name is real intelligent guy. So the timing system is important. So how do you interpret the data? And this is what it comes down to: is when you pick up a skull out the ground, how do you interpret that data? Or you find some tools. What does the word science mean? It means knowledge. Okay, knowledge. The difference between historical science and real science. We're talking about historical science. We're taking a skull out of the ground and looking into the past. But real science is where you can go into a science lab and you can say, let's do an experiment. Here's the results. Let's do it again, same results. Do it again, same results. That's real science. What we're dealing with here is theories. We think it was like this. We think this happened. But they were never there. Not at all. So it all comes down to this. How you interpret the data, and do you have a presupposition, and then are you honest with the findings? Because if you've held on to something for years and years and you find something, like we talked about the Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, if you find out actually we find them in all the graves, so we've got to scrap the model, and but you won't, because your career depends upon it, or your books depend on it, or your pride, you know, whatever. But you've got to be honest. That's real science. Our science is being honest with the data. And so evolution has to have these dating systems to make all of this work. You've heard of things like radiometric dating and carbon dating and fossils, the fossil index, the geology. They look at the landscape and they say, oh, this took millions of years. And it all sounds so scientific and it all sounds so great. But when you actually start looking into these systems and researching them, you actually find that they're doing the same sort of thing. They've got a presupposition in every single case. Now, I just want to show you some things. Radiometric dating. Why not just take... radiometric dating is where a chemical is unstable in a rock and it stabilises into another element, an isotope, right? And they measure how long that takes and say, well, that means that rock's that long in time, that old in time, right? But the way you could solve that is just get a new lava flow that's cooled down, get the rock, knock it off and go and date it. And what should it say? 0 or 1 year old. And they've done this. Christians have, by the way. They're sending blind samples. You have to send them in. If you tell them what they are, they won't do it. Because it's a bent system. It's a corrupt system. Mount Etna, In the 1900s, we know when it erupted and when it cooled. The dating came back 700,000 years. Mount St. Helens, we know this happened, this in America, in the 1980s. It came back with 2.8 million years. Mount Kaliya, 1960s, which is like 50, 60 years ago, came back in 8 point. And there's just example of where these dating systems are corrupt. And sometimes I'll send the sample and ask for the sample back because they didn't get the right date. It doesn't fit very well. So in many of these cases, multiple samples were sent and returned because the data did not fit the picture. We found a dinosaur bone that's 70 million years old. We sent off a sample of a rock that was close to it, and it come back 3 million. That's no good to us. So they tell them the information. We're looking for this, and they'll do that. And if you look in the scientific journals, you'll find this sort of information. Carbon dating. When the cosmic rays come to the Earth, they hit nitrogen, it turns into carbon-14, which is unstable, and eventually turns into carbon-12. It goes into plants, plants absorb it, animals eat it, and we eat the animals. And so we've all got carbon within us, and when we die, carbon-14 slowly turns into carbon-12, and it lasts for about 5,700 years, at least 10 lives, they call it 10 lives. And so it can last up to 50,000 years. Okay, coal, which appeared at the same time 300 million years ago, according to the theory, has been found. All coal has carbon-14 in, and it shouldn't, because it supposedly happened 300 million years ago. It all appeared at the same time, coal. Diamonds are billions of years old, and yet carbon's found in diamonds. Dinosaurs are tens of millions of years old, and yet carbon has been found inside the bones. They're digging open, they're cracking open fossils now, which they never used to do. They're finding soft tissue in the fossils, okay? And they're carbon dating the soft tissue, and it's coming up to tens of thousands of years. Fossils, they explain how do you remember the old index fossils, you know, the simple things at the bottom and it gets more complicated at the top. So you find a fossil and you go, well, it fits there. That was invented by Darwin. Darwin made this up. It was out of his imagination, again. And so when they find a fossil, it's got to fit where evolution tells it to fit. So the sequence of fossils are all over the place. You can find sea fossils on mountain tops. I've got a picture of one in a minute, where they found some oyster shells at the top of mountains. They found soft tissue, blood vessels, cells, and just general tissue, repeatedly found in fossils. They've just found this week, there's a type of worm that lives everywhere. It's a parasitic worm. They found this inside fossils. Soft, stretchy material, flexible material, blood vessels. How can that be millions of years old? It's changing it the way everyone... Polystrata fossils, these are fossils that go through the entire strata. So like a tree trunk, going through it, like you've got millions of years here, and one fossil going through and you see that all over the world. And what we learn is that when the floods happen, trees turn upside down, the peat builds up over time, and it gets fossilised like that, with the roots up at the top, and because that's what happens. Well, I'll show you some pictures. Okay, so there's a polystrata fossil. So that should have been millions and millions of years ago, and you're walking along and all of a sudden you go, oh, what do I do with that? And they're all over the world. Okay, that's a polystrata. See, it's going all the way through. And you see the layers. There's another one. This is T-Rex, Tyrannosaurus Rex soft tissue. This is what triggered it about 20 years ago. An atheist, she was an atheist, Dr. I forget her name, Mary Schweitzer. She worked with Jurassic Park to get the film going, or she was the specialist for the film. She found this, and she couldn't believe it, because it shouldn't be there. And now they're finding more and more of these fossils. It takes millions of years to produce canyons. The Grand Canyon, you know, the river that runs through the middle, what's it called? The Colorado River. Cut through that over millions of years, and that's why all these lines and lines are there. Okay? Mount St. Helens, exactly the same. That was in March, and that was in May. 400 feet, see there's a person standing at the bottom. 400 feet of sedimentary rock laid down in a few months. Some of that was laid down in hours. But if you never knew that you would walk down as a geologist and you've been taught all this, what would you say? That took millions of years. Yeah, millions. And this little river in the middle, and there's a little river in the middle there, it cut through the... Yeah. That's 400 feet high. Here's another one. These are shells at the top of Mount Everest. How do you get shells at the top of Mount Everest? The flood. Yeah, the flood. Here's another one. These are 6-foot oyster shells. 6-foot wide oyster shells at the top of a mountain. I think it's there, I've got it there. Andes Mountains, more than 500 giant fossilised oysters were found 3,000 metres above sea level. How'd you get that? It was the flood. Okay. A hammer, this is called the London Hammer, found in rock. How'd you get an iron hammer in rock? Because rock forms over millions of years, you know. And these are what they call UPS artifacts. You've heard the term? Out of place artifacts. But it's an acronym, do you know, like when you get UPS? That's what they call it, UPS art. They just shouldn't be there. So they find hammers. There's masses of these examples of UPS out of place artifacts. This is coal, and in coal they found this little brass thing. Yeah. That should be 300 million years old, but also it looks like someone was around at that time doing that. Unless over millions and millions of years it formed like that, you know. It's like, but they wouldn't say that, would they? Because they just know that that's Babylon. What's that there? It's a Stegosaurus in Babylon. Here's another one. This is the Aztecs or the Incas. And there's tens of thousands of these stones with images, what they've drawn on, doing things like brain surgery and stuff like that. And here, what's that? That's a dinosaur grabbing a man and eating him. Okay, here's another one. You see, see there, Triceratops. These are a couple of thousand years old. Brontosaurus or some. These are all dinosaurs. What's that? If you saw that and dug that up, this is what they do. They get the plasticine out now, don't they? And they go, right, and they'd make it look like what? A terrifying. What animal's that? Does anyone have a guess what that is? Hippopotamus. But if they were to, this is what they'll do. There's a picture here. You know, see the one below there. That's what they do with the data. When they find a skull, they'll start putting plasticine, or the artist will come out and start drawing. It's in their imagination. It's all imagination. You've got to be honest. It's not real science, is it? Really isn't real science. Okay. On time, 1 minute. How about that? Any questions? No? Okay. We'll close in prayer. Gary, would you close for us in prayer?
Father, thank you for today. Thank you for being with us. Father, thank you for the messages that we've actually heard. Father, thank you that we can just meditate on what you've actually shown us. So if those questions do actually come up, we can actually point them to the word, point them to the truth of what is actually there. But Father, thank you that you'll help us do that in love. Father, thank you that when we actually leave this service, that we will have a blessed afternoon, ready to come back this evening to receive even more from you. Praise in Jesus' name.
Amen. Thank you. There's a lot of tired faces today. People watch that football last night. Feeling better? Complete recovery or? It was the crisps. He sent me a message that he should have sent to you. Didn't you get it?